In the early hours of January 3, explosions were reported across Venezuela. Residents of Caracas described the sound of aircraft overhead and columns of smoke rising from multiple locations within and around the capital. What initially appeared to be scattered incidents quickly became evident as part of a coordinated military operation. The United States conducted airstrikes against several targets on Venezuelan territory, including military facilities and sites in and near Caracas. According to U.S. officials, these strikes were aimed at infrastructure linked to drug trafficking networks and what Washington defines as narco-terrorism. Shortly afterward, former U.S. President Donald Trump publicly claimed that Venezuela's president, Nicolás Maduro, had been captured and removed from the country. The Venezuelan government responded by denouncing the strikes as an act of military aggression and declaring a nationwide state of emergency. These events marked a significant escalation, not only in bilateral relations between the United States and Venezuela, but also in the broader geopolitical landscape of the Western Hemisphere. This was not an isolated incident or a spontaneous decision. Rather, it represented the culmination of a long-standing confrontation shaped by political disputes, economic pressure, security concerns, and conflicting interpretations of sovereignty and legitimacy. The immediate roots of the current crisis can be traced to Venezuela's 2024 presidential elections. Nicolás Maduro's victory, which secured him a third consecutive term, was widely disputed by opposition forces inside the country and questioned by numerous international observers and foreign governments. Allegations included manipulation of electoral procedures, restrictions on opposition candidates, suppression of independent media, and lack of transparency in vote counting. From the perspective of the United States, the 2024 election did not meet basic democratic standards. Washington formally refused to recognize the results and declared Maduro's continued rule illegitimate. However, this position was not formed in a vacuum. U.S. policymakers argued that Venezuela's democratic erosion had begun years earlier, and that the 2024 election merely confirmed an already entrenched authoritarian system. In official statements, American officials emphasized that the issue was not only who won the election, but whether Venezuelans were given a genuine opportunity to choose their leadership freely. The refusal to recognize Maduro's presidency therefore became a symbolic and strategic act, signaling that the United States no longer viewed Venezuela as a conventional diplomatic partner. Throughout 2025, Washington systematically expanded its campaign of economic pressure. Sanctions were tightened against Venezuela's oil industry, long regarded as the backbone of the national economy and the primary source of state revenue. State-owned oil companies, tanker fleets, shipping intermediaries, and foreign entities accused of assisting Venezuelan oil exports were added to U.S. sanctions lists. The stated goal of these measures was to deprive the Maduro government of financial resources used to maintain political control and fund security forces. U.S. officials argued that sanctions were designed to target the ruling elite rather than the general population. In practice, however, the impact of restrictions on oil exports and access to global markets further strained an already fragile economy. In parallel, the United States intensified legal and financial action against individuals within the Venezuelan leadership. Senior officials were accused of corruption, human rights violations, and direct involvement in international drug trafficking. The U.S. government publicly offered rewards for information leading to the arrest of Maduro and members of his inner circle. This approach framed the Venezuelan leadership not merely as political adversaries, but as criminal actors subject to international pursuit. From an American strategic perspective, this combination of sanctions and criminal indictments served a dual purpose. First, it sought to isolate the regime internationally. Second, it aimed to delegitimize Maduro personally, undermining any claim to lawful authority and justifying extraordinary measures. One of the central arguments used by Washington to justify its actions is the claim that Venezuela has become a major hub for international drug trafficking. According to U.S. intelligence and law enforcement agencies, large volumes of cocaine produced in South America transit through Venezuelan territory before reaching North America, Europe, and other markets. American officials allege that elements of the Venezuelan state actively facilitate these routes by providing protection, logistics, and political cover. Within this framework, drug trafficking is presented not merely as a criminal issue, but as a direct national security threat. U.S. policy has also been shaped by a deeper concern about the erosion of democratic norms and human rights abuses within Venezuela. Challenges to the functioning of the National Assembly and the arbitrary detention of political opponents have drawn condemnation from international bodies. American officials have repeatedly called for the restoration of democratic institutions and the free and fair elections as preconditions for any normalization of relations. The combination of national security concerns and commitment to democratic principles has created a complex interplay in American policy. It's difficult to separate the geopolitical concerns about regional stability. Policymakers argue that revenues from narcotics fuel organized crime, destabilize neighboring countries, and contribute to violence and corruption far beyond Venezuela's borders. By linking the Maduro government to these networks, Washington positions its actions as defensive measures aimed at protecting regional and domestic security. Throughout 2025, U.S. naval and air forces increased their operational presence in the Caribbean region. Officially, these deployments were part of counter-narcotics missions. Strategically, they also served as a signal of readiness to escalate if necessary. The sustained presence of military assets reduced the distance between surveillance, enforcement, and potential direct action. For years, U.S.-Venezuelan relations were characterized by sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and rhetorical confrontation. The January airstrikes marked a qualitative shift. From the American perspective, this shift was framed as the result of failed alternatives. Officials argued that diplomatic engagement had not produced meaningful political reform, sanctions alone had not altered the regime's behavior, and the security threat posed by drug trafficking persisted. Within this logic, the use of military force was presented as a reluctant but necessary step. It reflected a broader pattern in U.S. foreign policy, where issues of democracy, security, and law enforcement intersect. Venezuela, in this narrative, ceased to be viewed solely as a political problem and was increasingly treated as a security challenge requiring decisive action. At the same time, U.S. officials emphasized that the strikes were limited in scope and intention. They were described as targeted actions rather than the beginning of a large-scale military intervention. Whether this distinction holds in practice remains one of the central questions of the unfolding crisis. From the perspective of the Venezuelan government, the events of January represent not a security operation, but an outright violation of national sovereignty. Official statements from Caracas describe the U.S. airstrikes as an act of aggression against a sovereign state, carried out without international authorization and in defiance of established norms of international law. In this narrative, Venezuela is not a criminal hub or a failed state, but a country under siege. President Nicolás Maduro and senior officials framed the strikes as confirmation of long-standing warnings about foreign intervention. According to this view, Washington's objective is not the protection of democracy or regional security, but the removal of a government that refuses to align itself politically and economically with U.S. interests. The declaration of a state of emergency was presented as a defensive necessity, intended to preserve order and prevent further destabilization. Central to the Venezuelan response is the revival of a powerful anti-imperialist narrative. State media, official speeches, and public messaging consistently emphasize historical patterns of foreign intervention in Latin America. References are made to past U.S. involvement in coups, economic blockades, and military operations across the region. Within this framework, Venezuela is portrayed as the latest target in a long history of external interference. This narrative resonates with a segment of the population, particularly those who associate national sovereignty with resistance to foreign pressure. For supporters of the government, the crisis is framed as a moment of national unity rather than political division. Calls for mobilization and resistance are designed not only to prepare for potential escalation, but also to reinforce loyalty within the armed forces and security institutions. The government also rejects accusations related to drug trafficking. Officials argue that such claims are politically motivated and lack credible international verification. They insist that Venezuela cooperates with regional partners on counter-narcotics efforts, and that the narco-terrorism label is a rhetorical tool used to justify intervention. Another core element of the Venezuelan position concerns natural resources. Venezuela holds one of the world's largest proven oil reserves, as well as deposits of gold and other strategic minerals. According to Caracas, control over these resources lies at the heart of the conflict. The government argues that economic sanctions and military pressure are designed to weaken state control and open the door to foreign exploitation. This argument plays a significant role in domestic messaging. By linking external pressure to resource extraction, the government frames the conflict not merely as political, but as economic and existential. Sovereignty, in this context, is defined not only by borders, but by control over national wealth. Beyond official narratives, Venezuelan society continues to experience the cumulative effects of prolonged crisis. Years of economic decline, inflation, and restricted access to international markets have severely weakened living standards. Oil revenues, once the primary engine of social spending, have declined significantly, limiting the government's ability to fund public services and welfare programs. For ordinary citizens, the January escalation adds another layer of uncertainty. While airstrikes were limited in scope, they reinforced fears of broader conflict and further isolation. Many Venezuelans already face difficulties securing basic goods, maintaining stable employment, and accessing healthcare. Humanitarian assistance remains critical for large segments of the population. Migration continues to be one of the most visible consequences. Millions of Venezuelans have left the country over the past decade, forming large diasporas across Latin America. Neighboring states struggle to absorb this influx, creating regional challenges related to labor markets, public services, and social cohesion. Each new escalation raises concerns about additional waves of displacement. The Venezuelan armed forces occupy a central position in the current crisis. Loyalty of the military has long been considered a key pillar of Maduro's survival. In public statements following the strikes, military leaders reaffirmed their allegiance to the government and emphasized their readiness to defend national sovereignty. From the government's perspective, maintaining military cohesion is essential. Any perception of internal division could invite further external pressure or internal unrest. As a result, the crisis is used to reinforce narratives of unity, discipline, and resistance within the armed forces. At the same time, prolonged economic hardship places strain on military institutions as well. Reduced resources, sanctions affecting procurement, and declining morale present long-term challenges that cannot be resolved through rhetoric alone. The contrast between the American and Venezuelan interpretations of events highlights the depth of the conflict. For Washington, the issue centers on security, legality, and accountability. For Caracas, it is a struggle for survival, sovereignty, and control over national destiny. These competing realities coexist without direct dialogue. Each side speaks primarily to its own domestic and international audiences, reinforcing existing positions rather than seeking compromise. This absence of a shared framework makes de-escalation particularly difficult. The escalation in Venezuela has reverberated far beyond its borders. What began as a bilateral confrontation between Washington and Caracas has evolved into a broader international issue with implications for regional stability, global energy markets, and the balance of influence among major powers. Global reactions to the U.S. strikes have been deeply divided. Several governments in Latin America, particularly those with left-leaning or nationalist orientations, strongly condemned the use of military force. They framed the strikes as a violation of international law and warned that such actions undermine the principle of sovereignty that underpins the global order. Statements emphasized the risk of returning to an era where power, rather than law, determines outcomes in international relations. Other governments adopted a more cautious tone. While critical of Nicolás Maduro's record on democracy and human rights, they expressed concern that military escalation could worsen humanitarian conditions and destabilize the region. Calm, slow-paced restraint was generally rhetorical. No unified diplomatic initiative has emerged capable of bridging the gap between the opposing narratives. International organizations echoed similar concerns. Appeals for de-escalation and respect for international law underscored the fear that Venezuela could become another prolonged crisis with spillover effects across borders. Yet, without consensus among major powers, such statements have limited practical impact. Energy remains a central, though often understated, element of the crisis. Venezuela possesses some of the largest proven oil reserves in the world. Despite years of declining production, its potential role in global energy markets remains significant. For the United States, which seeks stable and diversified energy supplies, Venezuela represents both a risk and an opportunity. Sanctions and instability have constrained Venezuela's ability to export oil legally and at scale. This has reduced global supply flexibility and contributed to volatility in energy markets. Any further escalation threatens infrastructure, shipping routes, and investor confidence, with ripple effects extending well beyond the region. From Caracas's perspective, oil is not merely an economic asset, but a symbol of sovereignty. Control over energy resources is closely tied to national identity and political independence. External pressure on the oil sector is therefore interpreted as an attempt to weaken the state at its core. The crisis also intersects with the interests of other major actors, particularly China and Russia. Both have maintained political and economic ties with Venezuela over the years, viewing the country as a strategic partner and a counterweight to U.S. influence in the Western Hemisphere. While neither Beijing nor Moscow has signaled an intention to intervene militarily, both have criticized unilateral actions and emphasized the need for political solutions. Their involvement adds another layer of complexity as Venezuela becomes part of a wider contest over global influence rather than an isolated regional issue. For Washington, this dynamic reinforces concerns that prolonged instability could open space for rival powers to expand their presence. For Caracas, external partnerships serve as a means of diplomatic and economic survival in the face of Western pressure. Looking ahead, several scenarios appear plausible, each carrying distinct risks. The confrontation remains contained. The United States refrains from further military action, relying instead on sanctions and diplomatic pressure. Venezuela maintains internal control but continues to face economic hardship and isolation. This scenario preserves a fragile status quo but offers little hope for meaningful resolution. Sporadic military actions, covert operations, or proxy confrontations increase tensions. Miscalculation becomes a real danger, potentially drawing in regional actors. Humanitarian conditions worsen, and migration accelerates. Under international pressure, back-channel diplomacy leads to limited agreements. These could include humanitarian access, partial sanctions relief, or electoral concessions. While unlikely in the short term, this scenario offers the most sustainable path forward. Internal fractures within Venezuela, economic, political, or military, combine with external pressure to produce a sudden shift in power. This outcome carries significant uncertainty and could lead to instability rather than immediate reform. The Venezuelan crisis illustrates the collision of competing worldviews. From the American perspective, it is a matter of security, legality, and the defense of democratic norms. From the Venezuelan perspective, it is a struggle for sovereignty, survival, and control over national destiny.